the new ASHRAE 189.1 standard, and I'm going to focus specifically on Section 9 of the standard. So that'll be what we talk about today, and we will jump in here and get started, and then we will leave questions at the end. So if you have questions throughout, as you saw on the previous screen that Ryan was showing, there are opportunities for you at the top of your screen to be able to raise your hand or ask for me to speak louder or softer. Also on the left, there's a chat box where you can chat in any questions. So go ahead and, as we're going along, if you have questions, feel free to chat those in on the left, and I will answer them at the end of the presentation. So rather than trying to keep up with them throughout, go ahead and put them in, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started here. My background, I'm an electrical engineer. I've been with the Corps just almost 10 years now and have been working in the sustainability program for most of those 10 years. Started in 2003 and have really been working on sustainability for most of that current time. So excited to be able to share a little bit with you about the new ASHRAE 189.1 standard and talk through it as we talk specifically about Section 9. So before we do get into the 189.1 discussion, I wanted to highlight a little bit of context for you. You may have seen an ECB that came out in September on the Regional Energy and Sustainability and Life Cycle Cost Analysis Centers of Expertise. Those, we developed a SharePoint or a website recently for those Centers of Expertises, and we're going to be working on rolling out those Centers of Expertise here in the next several weeks and months. And I wanted to highlight it here for you. Each of the different regions has been assigned a specific competency area. So some of you may be familiar with those, and you maybe went and saw the ECB that came out in September, went and looked at the website to get an idea of what those different areas are. The purpose of these regional centers is that we have a lot of different areas of sustainability that the Corps is working on becoming more competent in across all the different districts. And so these sustainability centers, their purpose is to have specific focused assignments for each of the different regions so that not everyone becomes an expert all at the same time, but we have a couple different areas that each region is assigned that they become an expert on and then share that expertise. And that's part of why you're hearing from me today. Northwestern Division has been assigned the Center of Expertise for Waste, and so the presentation today, a component of it is materials in addition to waste. And so we'll talk about that as we go through the slides today, but fundamentally the purpose is to build competency across all the different districts. We want everyone to be knowledgeable about these requirements. It's not that these are work centers where we send work to, because as we all know, sustainability is something that is integral to every project that we are working on. So it's not something where we're sending work to one district or one region or another, but it's really focused on information sharing. And so that's the fundamental purpose of these regional centers. So you can see here on this next slide, I've highlighted what those different, we have two key pieces associated with these centers, building competency and sharing information. So building competency, the first step is assigning these different assignments to the regions. And so you can see here, you can look for what region you fall in, and you can see what the assignments are for your region. We've all been getting up and going in the last several weeks and months, so some of these centers are further along than others in the development stages, but you can see the point of contact there. If you've got questions or if you have interest in being involved in any of these, feel free to reach out to that point of contact and look to them for some information. So specifically for my area in waste and for the assignment that I have for building envelope in Northwestern Division. If you are someone who has expertise and knowledge in waste, because you're here and listening in on this webinar today and you've done some significant waste reduction projects or other activities, I would be more than interested in talking with you to find out how we could pull you into our regional center. And that's similar to the other POCs. We all are looking to build our network of individuals across the Corps, because I know that while we do have experts within Northwestern Division working on waste reduction strategies, I know that those experts exist elsewhere across the Corps. But today, I don't know who those individuals are. So if you want to reach out to any of these individuals, you are welcome to do that and start interacting with them. If you have specific background on wind or waste to energy or district, I mean, any of these that are here, that opportunity exists for you to reach out and connect. And a good way to connect with those individuals is here on our information sharing website. So we've developed a website. This is just a quick screenshot of it. The link is there at the bottom of the page. You'll see in the bottom of your webinar here that there is a file share, and Ryan has gone ahead and posted these files. So you can download this PowerPoint and you'll be able to get a hold of this link to the SharePoint. You can also pull that from the ECB that was put out in September. So you can go onto there and you can look and see for each of these different regions, be reminded of what the assignments are. You can also go in, and we are currently working on adding our list of technical experts from across the Corps to these different assignments. So you can go in and see who the air barrier and passive house experts are within Northwestern Division, or you can go in and see who the wind experts are in South Pacific Division. So lots of good resources here. Each of the different technologies has a page. You can see it on the left there, kind of. And the purpose of those pages is to share guidance, to share training, to share policy, and other important information that everyone might need to know. So I wanted to start off with that just to bring everyone up to speed on what those regional centers are. Two key things. We are about building competency and sharing information, and that's part of these Tuesday webinars. What does it mean for you? I encourage you to take a look at the website. We are working on putting it together and getting it pretty well developed with information in all the different technology areas. If you're working on a project and you have a question on waste reduction, feel free to reach out to me and we will work to get you an answer, whether that be actually working with your team to edit specifications, be that doing some market research to find out what waste reduction opportunities are available in the market where your project is, or any other type of technical questions that you might have specifically for waste. Reach out to NWD. For these other technical areas, go to the website, take a look, and find out who the point of contact is, because these centers really are here as a resource. So that is what they're there for. We are working to build that competency equally and evenly across the Corps. So with those things in mind, we will jump into the discussion here this morning or this afternoon on the 189.1 building materials. So some key objectives you saw when Ryan sent the email out announcing the webinar, and we're going to come back to these at the end. So I encourage you to, these will be your quiz at the end, so I encourage you to keep track as we go through this presentation today about these objectives that are identified here. So we'll want to be able to make sure that we can know what the Army policy and what USACE ECBs mandate our 189.1 compliance. Some of you might be able to know that right off the top of your head without even having to look at the slides, but we'll go through that briefly. And then we'll want to identify the mandatory and prescriptive compliance requirements, as well as potential impacts to Corps of Engineers contracts. So those are the things that we'll be working on throughout the course of these slides, and we will link back to at the end for a little quiz to see how much we've been able to retain. So you've been warned, there will be a quiz at the end. So where does the 189.1 requirement come from, and why are we even talking about it within the Corps of Engineers and the work that we're doing for our military work? Starting at the bottom of the slide there, we initially saw the requirement for 189.1 compliance when Ms. Hammock signed the Sustainable Design and Development Update guidance in October of 2010. So 2 years ago, Ms. Hammock, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment, signed that memorandum which committed the Army, and in essence committed the Corps of Engineers as their design and construction agent, to delivering ASHRAE following 189.1 and delivering the high-performance sustainable buildings, which are federally mandated that we comply with the high-performance sustainable building requirements. And so in the review that Army did of those high-performance sustainable building requirements, they felt that by following ASHRAE 189.1, except for the two exceptions that are listed on the slide there, that would put us in a place where we can effectively confirm that we are complying with the high-performance sustainable building requirements. So the Corps issued an ECB in January of 2011 requiring that starting with the FY13 design program, from there on, that all of our projects comply with that memorandum. And then we have an ECB that came out this spring requiring our FY13 and beyond, again reiterating that all of those projects have to comply with ASHRAE 189.1. And so today we're going to talk specifically about one section of 189.1. For those familiar with ASHRAE, you know that it's an organization that is mostly mechanical engineers that comprise that organization. But as you see as we go through our discussion here today, this component of that standard is much broader than just something that a mechanical engineer or electrical engineer or even an architect would have responsibility for. So I want to highlight for you, kind of give you a message up front of the potential impacts to our contracts. We're going to talk through each of these, but I wanted to tell you, give you a summary up front of what it is that are potential impacts to our contracts for military construction in order to comply with ASHRAE 189.1. So within the standard, there's mandatory and prescriptive options, and then there is a performance option. And you can see under each of them, there are specific potential impacts to our contracts. And so we're going to talk through each of these, and we're going to talk through what those impacts look like and how we make corrections and changes to our contracts to address those impacts as we step through each of these piece by piece. So 189.1 is broken up into different sections. It has some of the familiar introductory sections that we know, and things like the purpose, the definitions, the administration. But you can see as we get into section 5 and on to different sections, we start to see where ASHRAE 189.1 is a much broader standard than something that just a mechanical engineer would have responsibility for. So as we look at section 5 with site components, section 6 with water, we continue on down and we get to section 9, which is what we're going to talk about today, the building's impact on the atmosphere, materials, and resources. You can see there's even a component here for construction and plans for operation. So this even gets beyond just what the Corps of Engineers might have responsibility for when we design and construct a building, and moves into some of the operations and maintenance components that an installation would have responsibility for. So this standard is pretty broad and far-reaching, and it's going to be an important one for us to, as our teams are looking at incorporating compliance, starting with our FY13 program, and as they've already been doing that, knowing that many of our 13 projects are well underway and already even completed. That's our purpose here, is to raise some awareness to these Section 9 requirements and make sure that we are familiar with what those requirements are and where we need to be making changes to our contracts to ensure that we're in compliance. The specific pages of ASHRAE 189.1 Section 9, Section 9 is a small portion of the standard, and it's only about 2 or 3 pages long. So it is definitely, what we're going to talk through today is something that you can pull that standard and you can read through that section pretty quickly. So what I've done here is digested that and even expanded it a little bit to give you some more information and background on those different components. But 189.1 is a pretty accessible standard, especially in these other non-mechanical areas, definitely accessible for non-mechanical engineers. Anyone can pick up Section 9 and read that and have an understanding of what the requirements are. So for those who are unfamiliar with 189.1, there are 2 different compliance paths for showing your compliance with the standard. There are mandatory provisions, which are just that. They're mandatory and required for every project to follow. You can think of those as the prerequisites on the LEED rating system. So everyone is responsible for complying with the mandatory requirements. And then projects have an opportunity to choose between the prescriptive path and the performance path. And we'll talk about the 2 different options here on 189.1 and see the differences between the prescriptive and performance path. At this point, the Corps has not directed contractors which way they are responsible for showing compliance. We've left it up to the contractors to choose to follow the prescriptive path or performance path. And same way, designers, in-house design teams have that opportunity to choose to follow the prescriptive path or the performance path. But I think as we talk about the 2 different options, specifically here on Section 9, you'll find that most projects are going to follow the prescriptive path because it gives you checklist and a quick go-by of what it is that we need to do to show compliance. And if you follow those components, then you'll know that you are in compliance and that you are following that prescriptive path and you've met the requirements for 189.1. So what are the specific areas of Section 9, and what are the mandatory and prescriptive and performance-based requirements? I've identified them here, the ones on the left. Mandatory requirements, every project must do. So there are requirements, and we're going to step through each of these and talk about them. Mandatory requirements, everyone has to do construction waste management. Everyone has to do sourcing of their materials in a sustainable manner. There are requirements about refrigerants, and then there are requirements about recyclables. And those are not recycled content material, but those are waste within the building and how we deal with the waste, using it, diverting it as a recyclable instead of sending it to the landfill. So those are the mandatory requirements. Every project has to comply with all of those, all 4 of those. The prescriptive requirements, you get to choose to comply with one of the 3 items on the top right of the slide. You can choose to comply with the recycled content, regional materials, or bio-based components. So it's not a requirement that you do all 3. You choose one of those 3. And then instead of doing the prescriptive requirement, if you choose to follow the performance-based requirement, following the performance-based requirement, you would use a life cycle cost or life cycle assessment, materials assessment. And we'll talk a bit about that, what that looks like, and why it's probably unlikely that many of our projects will be doing a materials life cycle assessment as the performance-based compliance for 189.1. So within the mandatory provisions, these are those 4 mandatory provisions again. I've used a mechanism throughout these slides where I've highlighted in bold those areas that have a potential impact to our contracts. So you can see the first and the 4th bullet there are highlighted in bold, and we're going to talk about each of these 4, but the 1st and 4th are highlighted because those are the ones that have the potential impact to our contracts and the potential maybe changes that we need to make to our specifications to ensure that we are complying with 189.1 Section 9. So the first one, the construction waste management requirement. There's a requirement within 189.1 that 50% of our materials are diverted from landfills and incineration. That's something that all of our projects have been doing for quite a while, so that's not really a significant change. Do note on the bottom there is a component in the Department of Defense Strategic Sustainability Performance Plan where the Department of Defense has committed to increasing that diversion percentage in the current and future fiscal years. So that's something that's getting put into the military transformation RFP, so that for projects that are using the RFP, that standard RFP, that will get incorporated. But when we are doing an in-house design on a project, we need to make sure that we're cognizant of that Department of Defense Strategic Sustainability Performance Plan, and we're incorporating those higher diversion percentages into our projects. But the key piece that has the potential impact for our projects is the number 2 there, the total waste limitations for new construction projects. This, if you look in the standard and you read through the instructions on it, for new building construction, and it is dependent on how much of a site has existing work on it. So it's especially applicable for new sites where we're doing new development, maybe in a new area of an installation, we're doing a new neighborhood development, or in an area that was developed several years ago, 20, 40 years ago, and has been vacant since then. These sites, there's a definite potential significant impact for those sites because there's a limitation in 189.1 of the total waste made at a project site. So for those new construction projects, they are limited to 12,000 pounds per 10,000 square foot of new building construction. And in the way that the guidance or the standard is written right now, that includes anything that's even those items which are diverted. So it includes both items that go to the landfill and items that are recycled. So really fundamentally at the bottom of the slide there, what this means is each of our projects needs to do a review of the site characteristics to make sure and determine, does that waste limitation apply to their project? If it applies to their project, there are significant updates that would need to happen to the construction and demolition waste management specification to provide those restrictions to the general contractor about the total waste produced on that site. So really the first step is making sure that we look at those site characteristics, find out if it applies to our project or not, and if it does, then we need to make some edits to the contract. So I encourage you, if that's news to you, I encourage you to take a look at that section of 189.1 section 9 and look and see, does it apply to your project or not? I don't expect it to apply to a lot of our projects, but it definitely will apply to some. And so it is going to be important for us to look at and make sure that we're following that in order, because this is a mandatory provision. It's not something that's a pick and choose or prescriptive or performance based, but this is one that everyone has to be in compliance with. So definitely that's a key take home. It's important to take a look at those waste limitations and make sure that we aren't exceeding those on our projects that are in new areas. The next two are additional mandatory requirements, and they have extracting, harvesting, and manufacturing. Again, 189.1, that the previous bullet there was real focused on the waste diversion. 189.1 section 9 goes into all materials components. So it's not just waste. Waste is a component of the materials. But another piece of that is also where are we getting the materials from and what are the materials made of. So here in the extracting, harvesting, and manufacturing mandatory compliance requirements, we have to follow any of the materials that are extracted, have to follow the laws and regulations of the country of origin, and we can't have wood from endangered wood species. So those are pretty accessible standards. Those are pretty accessible requirements that I don't see having a significant impact on our contracts. Those we always are required to be in compliance with environmental laws and regulations in the work that we do. So we've taken care of that requirement. As far as refrigerants, there is a disallowance of the use of CFC-based refrigerants in HVAC equipment. That's become a standard policy in products nowadays. So again, that's not something that I see a significant impact to our contracts. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about those. The next piece is one where I do see an impact, potential impact to our contracts. So this one has a requirement in 189.1 section 9. There's a requirement that recyclables and discarded goods are stored and collected within the building. And specifically, there's a requirement that any reusable goods in a apartment style building, so our barracks or Air Force dormitories, those types of projects would be required to have a place to collect and discard reusable goods. So soldiers can share, put something down in the reusable area, somebody else could come look through it and pick it up and use it in their barracks. There's also a requirement for fluorescent and HID lamps and ballast to be collected as a recyclable in order to make sure that those are being managed appropriately. The waste stream associated with those lamps and ballast is being managed appropriately, because those often have mercury content and other materials that we need to make sure aren't just going to the landfill. So potential impact to our contracts. For the reusable goods, many of our installations have a variety of different items in place and organizations in place that can help manage those reusable goods. The key here is making sure that those services are in place and then coordinating how those services are used. So whether it's the DLA disposition services, coordinating with them just to confirm how reusable goods get brought to that disposition services group. Do we need to collect it? Do they request that there be a collection site at the barracks, or is every soldier responsible for taking their own things that they want to provide for reuse to that disposition services, or to an on-post Goodwill or other type of reuse store? So there are opportunities there, but it just requires us to take a look, and rather than assume, we need to take a look and make sure that those services are available. And then as far as lamps and ballast, we need to simply make sure that we have space in the floor plans for those collecting those items. So we already have, for those projects that are pursuing LEED compliance, we already have a requirement for a recycling room or recycling space, designated recycling space. And so this is simply a matter, if we're going to comply with 189.1 section 9, in addition to all of the LEED recycling requirements, we have to also make sure that we deal with these fluorescent lamps and ballasts as well. So not significant impacts, but it is something that we've got to think a little bit differently about and be prepared to address in order to confirm that we're complying with the standard. So that gets us through what the mandatory requirements are and what the different impacts to our contracts are that I see from those mandatory requirements. Next, we're going to talk about the prescriptive requirements and where there's impacts for our contracts there. So the prescriptive performance requirements, you can see them listed on this slide there. Again, I've put the ones that I see as potential impacts to our contracts in bold, and we will talk through these different ones. So for the prescriptive option, an overarching impact to the contracts is that when there are material requirements in 189.1 section 9, the applicability is different than the applicability that we are used to for LEED compliance. So for all of our projects that have been complying with LEED, we have been not including many of these things that are listed here on this slide. So 189.1 expressly includes piping, plumbing fixture, and the rest of the things that are included on that slide there. So here's a deviation. If we are following LEED compliance and we are getting the LEED recycled content or LEED bio-based credit, it doesn't guarantee that we're complying with 189.1. So that's going to be an important thing for us to be thinking about and looking through as we are updating specs, as we are editing them throughout the design. We've got to make sure that all the piping, plumbing fixtures, all of those are included in the calculations for the different prescriptive items. So the prescriptive items, I'll go back one slide. The prescriptive items, you can choose one of the three: recycled, regional, or bio-based. So the key point here is, since all of those other mechanical and electrical items now get included in these calculations, it's going to change our overall percentage. So whereas we might have been at 15% recycled content for LEED, we likely will have a lower recycled content for 189.1 because we've had to include all those mechanical and electrical items in the calculations. So that's the key here, is that we have to think through, as designers, we've got to think through how, with that change of the equation, including mechanical and electrical, what does that do to our percentages, and how do we make sure we still attain them? So recycled content, you get to choose one of the three, right? So recycled content is one of the three to choose from for the prescriptive option. So the recycled content option is to have 10% of your total materials contain recycled content. Now again, that includes your mechanical and electrical and plumbing, different than the LEED calculation. I don't see this being a significant challenge for our projects. Many of our projects get well above 10%. So even when we change the way we do the calculations, we pull in the mechanical and electrical and plumbing, I still think this is a pretty attainable option for our projects. It is something we'll need to look at and think through for each of our projects, but it's definitely something that I would see as attainable. So I don't see that one as having a significant impact to our contracts. The next option, again, we have three options to choose from. The next option is regional materials. So if you don't want to do recycled content and you choose to do regional materials instead, in order to comply with regional materials, you have 15% extracted, harvested, recovered, or manufactured within 500 miles. And a key distinction there, for those familiar with LEED, is that it's the or. On LEED, it has to be and manufactured. So LEED is really trying to restrict closer ties with those materials and a closer connection within the location of the project. Whereas 189.1 opens and broadens that up a little bit. There's also an allowance in 189.1 for materials shipped by rail or water. So those are a couple things to think about as you're thinking about, do we want to go regional materials? Do we want to go recycled content? So if you're going to go regional materials, you got to think through what potential changes would need to happen in the calculations between 189.1 compliance and LEED compliance. and be sure that we're clear in the contract how we're documenting regional materials. The last option for the prescriptive option of the three is to use bio-based materials. Bio-based materials per 189.1, what they're looking for is to be USDA certified bio-based and to have wood building components with 60% certified wood. So again, apples and oranges, unfortunately. For those who've been working on sustainability for a long time, you've experienced that apples and oranges, the differences between LEED and other things. Here we have 189.1, also a little bit of a difference from the way LEED calculates things. So the impact here is you have three prescriptive options to choose from. The project team needs to look at those three, choose the one that you're going to pursue, and make any potential updates to your specs to reflect that choice. Is really the take-home message here. And again, as you've seen as we've been talking through this, this is well beyond what a mechanical engineer would have responsibility for. This is the entire project delivery team. This is not just one person. You might have one person leading the team with their 189.1 compliance requirements, but it's not just one person that can check off and say, yes, the project is compliant because I did these three things. This is definitely a cross-functional, entire project delivery team has an impact to 189.1. So the last piece, remember our projects can choose, everyone complies with the mandatory requirements, and then you can choose to comply with the prescriptive or the performance-based option. So the performance-based option, if projects are to pursue the performance-based option, they are required to conduct a life cycle materials assessment looking at two different building alternatives in two of the categories that are listed down in the middle of the slide here. And so you take a look at your base case of a building and then a building with more sustainable materials, and you see what's the difference in climate change between the two buildings. What's the difference in smog between the two buildings? And you have to show a minimum of 5% improvement. So why do I say most projects aren't going to pursue this? Fundamentally, a lot of us, we don't have a lot of experience in doing it. The recycled content requirement is one that I see many of our projects being able to comply with pretty quickly. And so when we look at trying to comply within the limits of the budgets that we have and the abilities that we have to do these analyses right now, likely to me that is the one that we will pursue on our projects. If people are interested in pursuing that life cycle assessment, that's definitely something to look at and consider, but the extent of the following that ISO standard and doing that full analysis of the two different alternatives is going to take some effort to become familiar with and be able to make sure that we are appropriately following that standard and comparing those two alternatives. So it's there as an option for teams if they so choose, but as expected, when 189.1 was put together, the prescriptive option was provided in each of these different sections with a purpose to help teams kind of have a checklist to be able to step through and quickly determine are they complying or not. So these performance-based options are a little bit more challenging to be able to effectively document and be able to pull all that together. And so it's not expected that a lot of projects are going to pursue this performance-based option. So here this is a slide I showed you early in the presentation. I know we've talked through a variety of different slides. So what I've done is I've pulled together and highlighted again what those impacts, where I see potential impacts to our contracts. So within the mandatory provisions, we have the waste diversion percentage, where we might need to make updates to our contract to reflect the waste diversion requirements that are associated with the Strategic Sustainability Performance Plan from Department of Defense. Then waste limitations. For some of those new construction sites, they will need to have that limited 12,000 pounds per 10,000 square feet of waste generated on site. So we'll have to take a look at that. Reusable goods, if we have a barracks or a dormitory that we're doing, definitely need to coordinate and talk through with the installation to find out where reusable goods can be handled on site. Fluorescent lamps and ballast, have to take a look and make sure that we provide space in the recycling area for those to be handled and managed appropriately. And then for the prescriptive option, the big piece is the applicability of some of the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing equipment. So there's definite applicability beyond just what we're used to in LEED for these prescriptive requirements. And then there's, again, on items 2 and 3 there are some differences. All of those on the prescriptive option are differences from LEED. So all of those are areas where we've got to be cognizant in thinking about what's the impact, how we've done business in the past, now that we are required to comply with 189.1 on our FY13 and beyond projects, what's the impact, and how do we make sure that we are effectively complying? And then lastly, the life cycle cost assessment. That's an area where potential significant impact, at least as far as developing a new study and putting together that assessment of building materials and impact of the building, comparing 2 different categories. So as you've been hearing all of this, you may be wondering, wow, didn't realize that 189.1 had such a broad scope, didn't realize that this is something we need to be doing. Hopefully that's not all of us. Hopefully we've got some who have looked through 189.1 and dug into it and have already been incorporating this on our projects. But I did want to highlight for you, where is it currently in our contracts? I mean, this is an FY13 requirement. We've already got FY13 projects out there, so where does this fall? So within our military transformation RFP, we did a significant update. Headquarters did a significant update to that recently, within a year plus ago, to incorporate all these requirements for 189.1. And so if you look in the MT RFP, you can see there's a requirement there in the materials and resources section that the contractors are required to meet 189.1 section 9.3, those mandatory provisions that we talked through, and then they have a choice of the prescriptive or performance option. So we've incorporated that into the RFP. Have we been checking for compliance? Have we been doing any QA on it? Unknown. But that's definitely something, now that you know about it, it's something that you could be taking a look at and asking questions of the contractors. How are they complying with 189.1 section 9? And what are we doing to make sure that we are showing that we're in compliance with that section? We also have a requirement further down in paragraph or subparagraph to 543, where we have a requirement for the waste management plan. That's something that's been pretty consistent and standard in our contracts for quite a while. There's a lot of different best practices for how to do effective waste management plans. So that's definitely something that we can look at and get more information on from the contractor for them to show how they're going to confirm compliance with the requirements of 189.1. So with that kind of brings me to the end of where I was headed with walking through the standard. I know that was kind of a fire hose of info. It really is only 1 page of the standard of 189.1. It's 2 columns. So it is definitely accessible and something that you could go and take a look at and refresh some of these, compare that with these slides and see some connection there. So as we go through these webinar objectives that we started out with, I told you there'd be a quiz at the end. As we go through these, I encourage you, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and chat them into the chat box, and we will get to them as we get to the end of our slides here. So first quiz for you to be thinking about, you've seen it here, it's been on the slide for a little bit for you. State what the Army policy and USACE ECBs, which ones mandate 189.1 compliance. So hopefully as you've been reading that and you've been thinking about that, the ones that pop to mind would be those 2 ECBs and that Army Sustainability Policy Update. So those are the requirements that require, or those are the documents that require that we start with FY13 and beyond projects complying with 189.1. So the next one, we have 2, there are more than 2, but identify 2 mandatory compliance requirements. So 189.1 is set up with mandatory and prescriptive requirements as well as a performance requirement. So when we think about the mandatory one that every project has to comply with, there's a couple of them. And hopefully by now you've thought of maybe what 1 or 2 of those would have been. So that is the list of all of the mandatory compliance requirements. We have the construction waste management, materials, sourcing, refrigerants, and recyclables. So those are 2 of those would have been the right answer, any 2 of those. And then a prescriptive compliance requirement. If you remember the prescriptive compliance, we have 3 options for following the prescriptive compliance. Those 3 options are recycled content, regional materials, or bio-based products. So those are one of those is the right answer. And then lastly, impacts to USACE contracts. That was the slide I showed at the outset of the presentation, and then we stepped through again at the end. What are the potential impacts to our contracts? It's a pretty long list of where there could be impacts, so as you're thinking through or looking back through some of those slides, I do encourage you to keep those in mind, because there is definitely places where we need to step through on each of our contracts and see what is the applicability for these requirements and what changes do we need to make to our contracts to make sure that we're in compliance. So with that, that's the end of our presentation and the end of the slides that I have. I encourage you again, if you've got any questions that you want to chat in, you're welcome to chat those in. For anyone with a core, I've mentioned a couple times that you can take a look at the standard. That 189.1 section 9 is really just 2 columns of the standard. And so I encourage you to download the standard. If you work for the core, you can download that standard on the IHS website, and you can get to that from the whole building design guide, download the standard, and then you'll have a copy of it to be able to look through and reference on your projects. So if you don't already have it, I would encourage you to go ahead and make sure you get a copy of it. So we've got one question that came in. It says that it seems like 189.1 and LEED match each other fairly closely. To reduce waste, are we moving towards no longer paying USGBC for services, since 189.1 is equal, if not more stringent? So that's a good question. Definitely there's significant review going on right now across the federal government in response to a variety of different congressional inquiries and other requests, that we do look broadly across the federal government and see what is the appropriate standard to be using for ensuring sustainability on our projects. And as far as the connection between 189.1 and LEED, definitely they are very closely connected. 189.1 in essence codifies or turns LEED into a standard and makes it more of a baseline standard rather than something that we're pursuing and getting points for. So definitely the Army has committed to using 189.1. The other military services have not yet committed to using 189.1. And other federal agencies aren't quite there yet. So the Army is at the forefront of using 189.1. The potential of what does that look like for LEED, jury's still out. There's still review going on and still some analysis to determine which is the right path forward. So that's definitely a question that's being looked at and considered, but at this point we don't have an answer yet on what direction we're headed there. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. Anyone else have any other? You can put them in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A, either place. I have another question being typed, so I will hold on and we'll get that question. Annette asks, are we going to change standard design so they have room for reusable items? And so when we were talking about the requirement for reusable items for the barracks and the dormitories, given the fact that the installations have their different DLA disposition services and other facilities on post to be able to send those reusables, it really comes down to a discussion with each of the installations to determine, at this point, I'm not aware of any effort to make a broad-scale change to our barracks or dormitories plans to incorporate reusable rooms or rooms for reusable materials. So a soldier has an old Xbox, or unlikely they're going to give that away, but they have an old something that they want to give away and send off to DLA or to someone else, pass it on to the next soldier, at this point, we are not making an effort that I'm aware of to make significant changes to our floor plans at the barracks to incorporate that component. So that is something that needs to be discussed on each project with the installation to make sure that we are, that is a service that they have on the installation and something that they've got in place and they're ready to support that requirement. So the next question from Carol, why do they differ from the square footage? And I assume that this is on the reusable or recyclable components. Why is there a difference between the 1,000 square foot on LEED and the 5,000 square foot on ASHRAE? And I'll have to look into that. I don't know, as I say that, I don't think it is on the reusable room. I don't know offhand. I'll have to look into the standard more, or if you have a specific reference that you want to highlight there for me, Cato, to let me know which component you're talking about there at the square footage difference, then I can try and answer that question. So John asks, is the application of 189.1 equally applicable to DHP projects as well as MCA projects? The requirement for 189.1 comes from Ms. Hammock's October 2010 memo, and that October 2010 memo says that that memo applies across the board to all Army projects. So really that's the memo that we have to go back to look to for guidance on 189.1 applicability. So John, I'd encourage you to look back to that memo, and if that gives clear guidance or clear direction on the DHP projects, that's where it would come from there in that memo. Next question from Ken, does the removal of concrete for a new construction project count towards waste limitations? So I'm going to assume that we are coming into a site and there is an existing sidewalk or existing parking lot, and we're going to remove that. And if we come in and take that out and we chip it up and we use it as new base course or do anything else with it, give it to the installation for them to use as new sidewalk base course, that does count as waste diversion. So that is included in the calculations for waste diversion. Okay, I'm seeing a couple more questions. Annette indicates that ironing boards are a big problem. Annette, you have any more info to share on ironing boards there? As far as people not wanting them, or? So Bob asked on the materials and resources where we're allowed to, regional content, where we're allowed to ship materials we get an extension of 5,000 feet, or extension of extra miles to, for those materials that are shipped via rail or water. And Bob has a fair comment that most of our projects, we don't have a rail or water right next to. So not every project, we definitely have some where that is available, but right, very true. Many of our projects may not have that opportunity to take advantage of that expansion of materials and resources to include that rail and water clause. So it definitely is included there. Next question, does USACE have contractors have resources to offer training to non-engineering environmental staff on the applicability of 189.1? So that's a good question. On the broad applicability of 189.1, we have incorporated 189.1 training into our week-long sustainability class. So that is one opportunity. Right now that sustainability class is relatively focused on LEED, but we do have a component of 189.1 in that class. And I think even just that broader applicability of 189.1 question is a good segue for us to consider when we saw on Ryan's slides at the initial introduction to this webinar, there are opportunities for further webinars down the road. And I think the consideration for a webinar broadly on 189.1, I know that we've done them in the past, but I think that that's probably a good thing for us to consider doing, is hosting another webinar on 189.1, or even providing you with the link of where we've recorded that in the past and being able to share that with folks to be able to see that. So Net's comment, she had made a comment about the ironing boards earlier and followed up and said that in her understanding that the ironing boards, the installations buy them and then toss them, or maybe don't reuse them, or they get ruined, or for whatever reason they just get sent to landfill. It'd be easier to just reuse them. So definitely, and we can see here as we look at 189.1, we've only talked about section 9. As we look into some of the other O&M and other pieces of the standard, there are definitely places where we've got to pull in the installation, and it is a full, it's beyond just the core. There are other components of the Army that have an impact in the Army's total waste and our waste stream. So definitely something for us to be considering and talking with the installation. Another question that we got, what is the site preference exception? So there was a specific, I'll go ahead and go back to that slide. With the 189.1 compliance, there is within the Army's policy, there are specific requirements in 189.1 addressing site preference and renewable energy. And on the site preference exception, there are specific items highlighted in 189.1 where we are trying to avoid green fields and trying to avoid land for endangered species and other specific areas that are required to be avoided for all projects. And that's mandatory avoidance. The Army has granted an exception in that area because some of our land we're constrained, and the space where we need to develop next is that green field or is some other site that might be on the ASHRAE disapproved list. And so that's why that site preference exception exists. So I'm going to go back up. John had a good comment, was pulling in the total waste paragraph from 189.1. He said excavated soil and land clearing debris should not be included in the calculation. And that's an important clarification. So definitely if we are, as I've applied that in past projects, when we are doing significant cut and fill, or we are taking trees out, or taking soil and other heavy material like that out of our projects before we come in and do development, because of the weight of all of that material, that can easily tip our calculations and skew our calculations. And so that's correct. That shouldn't be included. So soil and land clearing definitely shouldn't be included. When I've worked on projects in the past, we have included things like concrete sidewalks. So because they've been a smaller component of, they're not a whole cut and fill area, but it's a sidewalk or it's a parking lot or other component. So that's my feedback. But thank you, John, for highlighting that specifically on the what the requirement is from the 189.1. Question from Joan. Initial costs for meeting the prescriptive or performance requirements may not always be cheaper. Currently there's a sustainability allowance for programming projects. Do you expect there might be an increase to that sustainability design percentage going for FY13 and beyond projects? So definitely this is something, as we are working on 3086s or PDRs, as we are evaluating those projects, we definitely want to make sure that across the core we're raising our awareness and our understanding of 189.1 so that we can be providing that feedback to the appropriate offices. If that 2% allowance is not enough for our projects to comply with 189.1, we need to document why that's not enough and where that's not enough and be able to provide that justification to request that higher percentage. At this point, I'm not aware of any efforts at headquarters to increase that percentage. Because that percentage has been in place in our 1391s for several years, it's effectively pulled in different, it's effectively raised the standards, and it now is 2% above even what previous standards of lead silver were. And so a lot of folks feel like that 2% is enough, but until we get the data showing that it's not, we'll just continue talking about it. So if you have projects where complying with the prescriptive or performance path requirements is not attainable with the 2% allowance that you have, we want to make sure that we identify and highlight those and be prepared to justify why we need a higher percentage for any of the specific projects.